In Metro DC, government drives 40% of the economy, employs millions, and has global impact. It also makes for some interesting stories. They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but what happens when that day gets scrambled? For GovExec TV, I'm George Jackson, and welcome to Scrambled, Lessons in Government Leadership. In April of 2023, Danny Werfel was sworn in as the 50th Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. It wasn't his first rodeo. Werfel had already served a decade and a half in government, including 7 months as acting commissioner of the IRS. Things looked very different this time around. A landmark piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act served as a catalyst for new initiatives at the beleaguered agency. In this episode of Scrambled, Werfel talks about his personal growth over the past 12 years, what he's learned, and how he's applying those lessons in government leadership to the agency's current transformation. Let's kick things off with the Commissioner of the IRS, Danny Werfel. Commissioner, great to see you. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to sit down to breakfast with me.
Thank you, George. I'm happy to be here.
So let's give the audience the context of your background, the challenge or the cultural transformation that you've been up against. Take us back to 2013, you are acting commissioner of the IRS at the time. What did the agency look like then? What does it look like today?
Well, for me, I spent my entire career in government before I got to the IRS in 2013 and was fortunate to experience a lot of different moments of challenge for the government. Almost from the day I came to the government in the 1990s, I became a part of an effort to deal with Y2K. Then shortly into my career, 9/11 happened. Later in my career, Hurricane Katrina, eventually the fiscal crisis that occurred, the banking crisis in 2008, 2009. And so I started to learn by being in various roles, often sometimes just the note taker in the back when I was very junior. But as I got older and got more experience and promoted within the federal government, I started to find myself more and more at the decision-making table. And so, the IRS at the time I was there was going through a leadership and management challenge. There was a sense of crisis. And so a lot of the job back then was basically calming the workforce, establishing a path forward, and really kind of working within a very complicated media and stakeholder environment to make sure that we were rebuilding trust. And so I learned in that moment, first of all, I brought a lot of what I learned in these other crises to the table. But I like to say that in the almost a year that I was there, I probably grew 5 years worth of leadership experience in that time, and learned a lot about communication, prioritization, being a good listener, but also being the spokesperson, taking some punches for an organization that needed someone to take some punches. But most important is calmness and the ability to demonstrate for people that may be going through a tough moment and are stressed about a situation, demonstrating resiliency and giving the organization a new direction with confidence. And I probably couldn't have done that on my first day, but as the weeks and months rolled forward, I became increasingly comfortable in understanding that that was my role and started to, I think, equip myself well in that role.
You have a ton of management-oriented experience. I mean, your time at Boston Consulting Group, you were one of the most renowned experts in the management of public sector, government-oriented issues. One question that I had going into this interview is, why the IRS? It's not an easy case study to get back into government. It may be the most challenging agency to lead in all of government. Why take that one on?
Well, first of all, I had this very unique experience that not a lot of leaders, private or public sector, get to do, which is I left the IRS, walked out of the commissioner's office in 2013, and 10 years later, walked right back in to that same commissioner's office after 10 years in the private sector, 10 years of growth and learning, new experiences, understanding the way different sectors and actually different countries operate in both the private and public sector. So in my decade at Boston Consulting Group, I grew and learned a lot. And that was built on the foundation of nearly 20 years of experience in government. And as I mentioned earlier, experience that was fairly dynamic, seeing moments where the government failed, like the first wave of response to Katrina, and seeing how government learned lessons and had a much more successful response in that same region with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And I had different roles in those processes, but learning that was part of my foundation. Then I go to the private sector and build on that and kind of additional layers of seeing success and what the preconditions of leadership success are, and seeing more versions of failure. Why the IRS? Well, because it's a special place with a critically important mission, and when I was there in 2013, I drew a connection to it. My whole career has been in and around government. My whole mindset has always been around public service. And what's unique about the IRS is it is the one organization in government that touches every household and every business in America. It has a tremendous responsibility, collects nearly all the dollars that fund the government are collected through the IRS. And not only that, for a century more, the main focus of the IRS and the main mission was to assess taxes and collect them. But that's actually changed more recently. Now the IRS is involved in some of the most important public policies of our generation. What do I mean by that? Healthcare. The whole way in which the Affordable Care Act operates is through our tax system. So the IRS plays a key role in healthcare access. Another example, anti-poverty. Some of the most important anti-poverty programs in government are credits, refundable credits that the IRS issues, including the Earned Income Tax Credit. And now, with the Inflation Reduction Act, climate change. A lot of experts around the world believe that the tax credits issued as part of the Inflation Reduction Act to drive industries to go more green is one of the most important pieces of legislation ever in terms of taking on the threat of climate change. So you have in the IRS an organization that not only interacts with just about every American on the essential duty of funding the government, but now increasingly responsible for some of the most important policy objectives that the country and the world face today. And when you combine that with the people of the IRS, who are tremendous civil servants, care deeply about the mission, come to work every day, know that being unpopular because you're the tax collector of the IRS, it's in the brochure, but they move forward with resiliency and they're proud of what they do. It was an easy decision when I got the call to come back in.
I sat next to former IRS Commissioner John Koskinen at our big black tie gala several weeks back. He was very complimentary around your leadership. One element that you have that he did not is this influx of funding, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. If you could talk about that for a moment and how it resulted in the new strategic plan that you rolled out in May.
So it's a really good question because it plays back to this juxtaposition of walking into the office in 2013 versus walking in almost 10 years later to the day in 2023. In 2013, I was walking into a situation where there was a crisis and something needed to be done to settle the atmosphere and take us forward. In 2023, it was an opportunity, not a crisis. And what was that opportunity? From 2010 to 2022, the IRS saw year-over-year budget reductions and resource reductions. With COVID in 2020, that really strained the IRS beyond where it could serve its mission-critical purposes. And so when you look at where the IRS was when I arrived, we had just completed one of the toughest filing seasons we've ever had, where we had the most struggle in responding to taxpayer questions on the phone. Our walk-in centers were shut down or fully or partially staffed around the country. We had a record paper backlog. We had anemic audit rates. We're suffering from significant attrition and workforce morale issues. And what the Inflation Reduction Act basically did was provide the IRS tens of billions of dollars to build back an IRS that could not only perform adequately, but also build an IRS now for the future. Because there was sufficient amount of funds, and there is a sufficient amount of funds, not just to make sure that we're answering the phones again and reopening all our walk-in centers and fully staffing them, which we are, getting the paper backlog down to what I call intolerance, which we've done, and now pushing and getting our audit rates up, in particular around wealthy filers, which is where we're laser focused on large, complex tax filers. We're doing all that. But now we are also creating the vision of what the IRS should look like for your children, my future grandchildren. We have to build an IRS that's ready for the new world, the digital world, the information world, a world in which people don't go into bricks and mortar locations all that frequently, where they've come to expect to get everything they need to get done from a business standpoint from their smartphone or their tablet. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we can meet the day-to-day needs of the IRS in serving taxpayers, but now we have the ability to build an IRS for the future, and it's a tremendous opportunity.
Who are the key stakeholders that you need to buy into that vision? Who do you have to engage with, and how do you engage them?
Well, it turns out that the tax community is a complex one. There's a lot of different stakeholders. I start with the taxpayers, and that's the most important place to start. That's who we're serving. And our mission, there's like an official mission statement that talks about helping taxpayers meet their tax obligations. My plain language version of that is we want to make the tax filing process less stressful. Filing your taxes is too stressful. It's too stressful because it's complicated. It's too stressful because it can be overly bureaucratic at times. It's too stressful because we have not historically done as much as we can do to simplify the complicated elements of our tax laws. And so we start with, can we make the case to taxpayers that the journey that we're going on is going to reduce their stress, reduce their burden, and make the tax filing process easier? So that's stakeholder number one. I then go to the employees of the IRS. We have to make sure the employees have the tools that they need to deliver on that mission of helping taxpayers and reducing that stress. So for the employees, it's about hiring the right numbers, because if you're going at something that needs 20 people and you have 5, that doesn't work well. It's about giving them training. And for the years that we were underfunded before the Inflation Reduction Act, one of the big areas that was cut was training. And as I said, the tax system's complicated. It changes every year, hundreds of times. There's a lot of moving pieces. We got to keep pace so that if you call an IRS customer service rep and you have a tough question, they have the answer because they've been trained. And then obviously technology. You know, we still operate, unfortunately, at the IRS, and we're changing that every day, but green screens and outdated technology staring in front of employees, not in today's modern world the best way to help them do their job. And then I could keep going. There are tax preparers, accountants, there are volunteers that work in stressed and low-income communities that are critically important stakeholders. Obviously, there's members of Congress who both oversee us and scrutinize the IRS and hold us accountable, but also decide what our funding is going to be. And so there is a constant debate about whether the IRS has too much money, not enough money. Is the IRS too big? Is it not big enough? And so I find myself very often engaging with Congress to do my best to explain what the facts are on the ground and what's at stake. Because if we underfund the IRS, it has very damaging consequences for taxpayers. They don't get their issues resolved. Their stress increases. They're more easily exploited by scam artists. But it also impacts the deficit. If we're not funded, we can't collect what is owed. And as I mentioned earlier, our focus, where we fell most behind during our years of underfunding, was assessing a balance due and collecting from our largest and most complex filers. So now we have to rebuild that muscle to be able to figure out where the tax evasion is amongst our most complex filers and make sure that we're holding them accountable to start playing by the rules.
I want to ask a question about politics, but I want to give you some context before I ask it. A lot of times at the Thanksgiving dinner table with my extended family, it's a challenge explaining what I do for a living. People equate the gov in GovExec as politics as opposed to the policy and practice, the business of government. One thing that I think is really unique to the IRS is that people just wait with bated breath for any red meat related to politics. And I'm curious, getting back to communication and that calmness that you referenced, how you advise people on your team or in the organization to deal with those types of moments. How do they communicate without turning something political?
So I love the question, and I've been asked it a lot. And I start with explaining, this is my take, that when politics enters the discussion of government, it's actually around a fairly narrow slice of government. So if you look at government, there are things that the government does that are just very basic and non-controversial. And then there are things that the government does that tend to raise debate and discussion about whether the government should be doing it or are they doing it too much. So things like, look, we're sitting in a diner, right? And we just ordered breakfast. And they're going to bring the breakfast out, and I have no stress at all, no worries that I can eat that meal and it won't have any toxins in it. It'll be safe to eat. And why? Because we have regulations and food safety inspections. I'm so confident in the safety of the food of this restaurant and any other diner that I might go to that I'd bring my children into that diner and not even think twice about it. And that's a huge part of what government does, is impact the quality of people's lives in ways that you don't often think about. And I try to explain as many as whoever will listen, including your viewers, that that's what the IRS is doing. It is funding through our collections. Most of the spectrum of government is completely non-controversial, and in many ways impacting people's lives in a very positive way, protecting them when they travel and fly in the air, making sure planes don't crash into each other, inspecting plane manufacturers to make sure that planes are meeting all safety standards so you can send your kids off on an airplane, drive home and feel safe. And by the way, on that drive home, there are government structures in place to protect you on your way home. And I try to reinforce over and over again that we have a skewed sense of the impact and the role of government because politics starts to only talk about a narrow slice of government, or within something that a government agency is doing, a particularly controversial element of that. And by doing that, I try to explain that we have to place politics in a bucket and not let it dominate and distract us from what we need to do. Because if we get too jumbled up by the politics of the moment, then we're not going to do our job. And if we're not doing our job effectively, then we're not funding the 99% of government that people are just fine with. I think people are fine that restaurants are inspected for food safety. And there are countless examples like that. No one's complaining that that we're paying air traffic controllers to prevent planes from flying into each other. Where people complain, again, it's in a slice of government, but from the IRS standpoint, we have a job to do. We're funding not just that small slice, we're funding all of these other activities that are essential.
Let's stay on numbers for a second. $4.1 trillion in tax revenue each year. You have 85,000 employees and a $12 billion annual budget. That's a lot. And it feels like that could be a really high pressure job to me. How do you deal with the pressure on that sort of portfolio, Danny? What do you do to sort of keep everything in context, level that calmness as you go forward?
Well, first of all, I have a philosophy that the success or failure that I would have as an individual in any role that I have really depends on the team that I'm surrounding myself with. And I really have tried in any role that I've had is to assemble and build a team that I can lean on. I don't like to lead alone. I like to collaborate. And I don't want to imply that I bring in a whole new team. When I arrived at the IRS 10 years ago and when I arrived more recently, a big part of my team are the people that have already been there, that really understand the organization, that understand, what help me to understand what are the preconditions for success or failure as we try to move forward, understand what the risks may be coming around the corner that they can help communicate to me. But then I also like to bring in additional new perspectives and new leaders to blend with the existing leaders. And then I try to empower them. And it's kind of like if I try to lift this table on my own, I could do it, but it would be hard. You and I lift the table a lot easier. If I started getting some of the other patrons around here to lift the table, suddenly it's easy, it's light. And so when you talk about the burden of running the nation's tax system, if I tried to do it on my own, I think it would crush me, but I don't. I lean on other leaders, I empower them, and we lift the table together.
I want to get back to the strategic operating plan as we come to the close of our conversation, because one of the key pillars of that is attracting, retaining, developing, empowering employees. The IRS and its workforce have had a rough road over the past several years, longer than a decade, those 12 years since you were acting commissioner, now commissioner. How do you engage that workforce? How do you inspire that workforce? How do you grow that workforce when they're up against some pretty strong headwinds?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to that 10 years ago versus now. When I was named commissioner 10 years ago and we were in the middle of a big management challenge and a crisis, my first phone call when it became public that I was IRS commissioner was to the Inspector General. But 10 years later, very different challenge, very different moment. My first phone call when it became public that I was going to be nominated as commissioner was to the president of the National Treasurers Employees Union. 2/3 of IRS employees are unionized, and I think of NTEU as an important, absolutely critical partner, because without the workforce and without investing in that workforce, we're not going to be successful. Investing in the people of the IRS is the right thing to do, because these are incredible public servants who deserve to have a career and a career path where they are thriving, where they have good work-life balance, where we're positioning them for better and better productivity, and where they have an opportunity to grow and thrive in the IRS as a career, and maybe in the government as a career, as a public servant. So it's the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do. because we have big ambitions and big challenges. And I can lay them out, I can create the vision, I can fight for resources, I can defend the agency when it's publicly attacked, I can acknowledge, and I do, and express contrition when we mess up. But none of the work can get done by me. The work, all the hard work of collecting over $4 trillion, of making the Affordable Care Act, the energy credits, the anti-poverty programs work, helping taxpayers who need our help because the tax system and the tax laws are so complicated. All of that is done by the workforce. It's actually, we are hiring, we are growing, because right now we are too small for the tax system that we have. So we're actually now approaching 95,000 employees. And a lot of people say, how can you be too small? The basic example I give is a walk-in center where people come to get help. And a walk-in center that's fully staffed on a given day can serve 300 people if we're firing on all cylinders. Well, very often 400 people show up. Sometimes 500 people show up. And we have to turn people away because we don't have the capacity to serve. Now, that tells me that there's demand because people need help with a complicated tax system. And it's these types of examples that I bring to stakeholders and members of Congress to say, this is why we're fighting for more resources, because there are taxpayers that need our help and they can't get in to see us because there are other taxpayers that got there first, and we want to serve everyone. We don't want to leave one taxpayer behind who has a question, a concern. If there's an opportunity to reduce a taxpayer's stress, we want to do that. And that's why it's important to have the right size. I don't want to be bigger than we need to be. And we just announced in our updated operating plan that we believe the staff size will plateau right around 102, 103,000. So we're not far off our goal. And the reason why we don't have to grow beyond that is because we are deploying technology to further automate, to further drive efficiencies. But even with all the automation and all the technology that we're investing in to make taxpayers have a much more digital and easier experience, even with all of that, we still need about 6,000, 7,000 more employees to make sure that we don't have moments like that where we have 400 people showing up and can only serve 300.
Danny Werfel, Commissioner of the IRS, thanks so much for sitting down with me this morning, sir.
Thank you, George.
Audience, thank you for tuning in. For GovExec TV, I'm George Jackson, and breakfast is my favorite. So, let's eat.